Hello guys, in our previous video we discussed CSS selector. In this lesson we are going to discuss CSS colors. Yes, CSS color is a very important topic when it comes to CSS. Yes, you can wave through these aspects when it comes to CSS. CSS colors comes in 4 ways. Yes, there are 4 ways in which you can apply colors in CSS. The first one is using the color name. Yes, you can use color name to specify colors to HTML elements. An example of color name is red, blue, black, violet, purple, yellow, orange, and so on and so forth. That's CSS name. And secondly, we have hexadecimal values. Yes, CSS color name is mostly used, followed by hexadecimal values. Yes, most of the time, developers use hexadecimal value as well to specify colors property. Now, example of hexadecimal value is FF000, FF000. That is, this denotes red color in hexadecimal value. You have a lot of hexadecimal value. You can make your research online to get more hexadecimal value. So hexadecimal value is mostly used to specify color. So this serves as alternative to color name. Yes, you can make your research more about that. And hexadecimal value always come in 6 digits. Yes. The first thing is, whenever you want to specify hexadecimal value, whenever you want to use hexadecimal value for colors, the first thing is you start that with hashtag, then followed by the 6 values, that is 6 digits, which represent the color. Yes, that is that on hexadecimal values. And another ways in which we can specify color in CSS is using HSL. This HSL stands for hue, saturation, and light. Yes, hue, saturation, and light. So the hue most of the time comes in the degree of the units of that hue is mostly represented as degree. Then the saturation is mostly represented as percent, while the light is also represented as percent. HSL. This HSL gives you an opportunity to apply opacity to the color. Let's say you want to make some level of transparency. You want to make the elements transparent. Though you have applied the color and you want to make that color a little bit transparent, you are given the freedom to do that in HSL. Unlike hexadecimal value and name, you can't make transparency unless you use opacity property, and that's separate on its own, and the opacity one is limited in such a way that all the elements stacked on the element you're applying the color to will also be transparent. But in this HSL, that's not the case. When you apply HSL and you apply transparency to that element, it won't affect the element on the one you are applying the HSLA to, the one you are applying the transparency to. That's the advantage of HSL over hexadecimal and name. And another one, you also have RGB values. Yes, most of us, we are familiar with, in our secondary school days, they were saying primary color and secondary color, and I think most of the time primary color is red, green, blue. Yes, same thing applies here, where from red, green, blue you'll be able to draft, or you'll be able to get other colors, other secondary colors. So you can use RGB value to specify colors in CSS as well: red, green, blue. So for red, if you want to specify red color, in CSS using RGB value, you'll be using 255, 0, and 0. If it is white color in RGB value, you'll be using 255, 255, 255, if I'm not mistaken. So this also gives you a freedom to apply transparency to your element. Unlike the hexadecimal value and name, the HSL and RGB value give you freedom to apply transparency to a particular HTML element. Yes. So that is that on the ways of applying colors in CSS. Yes, it is done in 4 ways. The first one is name, specifying the name. The second one is specifying the hexadecimal value. The third one is specifying the HSL, hue, saturation, and light. Or the last one is using RGB values. So most of the time, the one commonly used among developers is the color name, hexadecimal value, and RGB value. So you can make your research as well. So now let's move on to the practical aspect of this lesson. So now let's apply some colors in CSS. So how we erase this? Let me erase this because this is the one we did. The one we did last, I think it's not CSS. What was it called? Selector. So now we erase this. So what's going on? I've erased the HTML tag. So let me write it back. I've erased the head tag as well. So now let me apply some style sheets. Let me apply some styles. Let me start with the body. Yes, I want to make the the background to have a color of red using what's going on. So now let's give this body a property of color. So now let's give it a body. But before that, I think I have to put this style tag, the style open tag. Then within the style open tag, so let's give the selector of body, let's give it a background color of red. A background color of red. Background color of red. That's color name. Yes. Let me just specify a comment in CSS color name. That's how to specify a comment in CSS. We'll talk about that later on, but let's move on and let's focus on the color. So header, let's specify header in hexadecimal value. Let's give it a color of white. So let's give it a background color. Header is also part of the HTML document. So let's give it a background color of white. So here I'll be using hexadecimal value. And to start with in hexadecimal, I told you are going to use hashtag. Yes, you are going to start with hashtag, then followed by the hexadecimal value. So I think hexadecimal value for white in CSS is triple F. Yes, it's triple F. No, is it? Am I saying? Did I talk anything about triple now? Yeah, I want to say 6F. Yes, the F will come in 6 places. That is how to specify the color of white in CSS. Yes, F in 6 places. That's the hexadecimal value. F in 6 places. And mind you, whenever you are using hexadecimal, you start with hashtag. Yes. And here we have within the header, we have navigations. So now I don't have a data tag here, but let me quickly specify that. Let me specify that at the top of the document to header. So now I will cut this nav section and post it there. Post it within the header section. And post it within the header section. That's that. So now I've given the header a background color of white. So now I want to give the element within the header a color as well. Yes, that is the navigations, the element within the navigation, which is the hyperlinks. I just say hyperlinks, which is A. Let me give it a curly brace. So now let me give it HSL. So I want to use HSL to denote the background. Am I saying background color? I want to specify color here this time around. So I'll use HSL. HSL. Then what's the value for the HSL for red? I think it is 0, 0. Let me check here. I don't know it offhand, so let me just check. 0, 100%, 50%. 0, 100%, 50%. That's value for HSL for red. So now another one is I want to specify a background color for the H1. Yes, for the H1, I want to specify a background color for the H1. Or let me specify color instead of background color. I want to use background color this time around using RGB value. Using RGB value here. So RGB. So what's the value for RGB value for white? Is it 255? 255. 255. Yes, that's the value for white. RGB value. That is red, green, blue. So here, is an specifying RGB value. This is how it looks like. Whenever you want to specify RGB value, start RGB, then the name of the color will be within the value for RGB for white, or the color you want to specify will be within a bracket. Yes. HSL as well. So you start with HSL, then you open a bracket. The HSL value, that is the hue, saturation, and light. The value will be within a bracket. You can make more research on colors. So you don't need to stress yourself. You can make some research on colors, and the project which you want to work on, you can specify the color, or you can get the color online to apply it to the project you want to work on. So here the header here, I'm using hexadecimal value. To start hexadecimal value, you start with hashtag followed by the hexadecimal values, and that will be always that values will always be in 6 digits. Yes. This one is background color. Yes. Using name, specify the color name. Yes, the color name. So now let me put this in comment. Let me put this in comment. Hexadecimal value, X value. So I will just short the stuff. I don't need to write the X value. Let me just write it in full. Hexadecimal value. Hexadecimal value. I'm trying to put it in comments. Yeah, hexadecimal value. Use saturation light value. So use saturation light. Hue, saturation, and light value. Then here we have RGB value, red, green, blue value. RGB value. So now one last thing which I would like to show every one of us is whenever you want to work with color in, maybe you are using an IDE like Visual Studio Code, and you want to select color, you don't need to stress yourself. Yes, there is something called color picker. You can use color picker to quickly get the color you want to apply, or the color you want to use in your project. What you just have to do is press Ctrl Shift P. Yes, Ctrl Shift P. Yes, a search box will pop up whereby you'll be able to search for extension here. So now I'm searching for color picker, color picker, color picker. Just click search. Can you see now we have color picker? You can pick any color you feel like. Here is in RGB. You can pick any color you feel like. Can you see? Yes, any color you feel like, or any color you want to apply to your project. Yes, there are tons of color in the color picker. This is HSLA value, that is hue saturation light. This is hexadecimal value. Is RGB value. So you can pick a lot of colors. Yes, can pick any colors you feel like, or any combination of colors you want to add to your project. So now the last thing is, let's show the project. Let's show the results online, and let's see how it goes. I think this is a file. Let me reload it. Can you see the color has been applied? This is the background color applied to the body, which is the red. And here is the navigation bars, that is the header. Yes, we specify the header as white using hexadecimal value. And here are the links. The links, we specify the links color as red using the HSL value, hue saturation light, and you specify the H1 as white as well. So here is the application of CSS Colors. Yes, and we talk about type of CSS colors. I think I've demystified the type of CSS color we have. I think I've demystified the type of CSS color we have, so that shouldn't be an issue. I've explained everything about CSS color. You can make your research online on CSS color as well. So one thing is, I want to add opacity to some items. Let me start with the links. I want this link to be transparent. Let me add transparency of 0.3. You see how faint the stuff would be. You know, I said earlier that you have two options. There are two color type in CSS that you can add transparency to, and it gives you the freedom to add transparency, unlike the name and the hexadecimal value. See how transparent the element will be now. So you can add some level of transparency. Just have to do is add a, that is RGBA. That A means transparency, like something like, alpha. I think it's called alpha, but in a practical sense, it is transparency. I want to have some level of transparency to your element. So see how faint it is. Yes, the links looks faint now, and this one also looks faint. That's the freedom which the RGBA and HSL gives you. It's giving the freedom to make element transparent. Sorry. So now let me cancel the A and let me cancel the R. So now let's see how the element, let's put it back to the default appearance. See now that the transparency will be gone now. Yes, so that is that on CSS color. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. If you find this class